Guys, I am excited to welcome Dr. Archie Cubarrubia, a Renaissance brother from American University. He serves as the Deputy Director for Institutional Transformation at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He leads the team at the foundation responsible for understanding how colleges and universities transform themselves to dramatically improve their performance and eliminate student success gaps by race and income. Archie has worked to improve post-secondary student success and institutional effectiveness for nearly 2 decades, and from multiple vantage points, from institutional leadership to federal policymaking to state policy advocacy. A lifelong student advocate, national expert on post-secondary policy programs and data. He has held leadership roles at the U.S. Department of Education, Miami-Dade College, Northern Arizona University, and Partners for College Affordability and Public Trust. He earned his BS in Health Studies and Master's in Education in Policy Planning and Administration from Boston University, and his doctorate in education in higher education administration from the George Washington University. So he is full of knowledge, all relevant to the work that you do as vice presidents of member development. He does that work on a daily basis at what I think is one of the coolest organizations in the country, if not the world, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Archie. He'll share some stories, experiences, and tips for you, and then you'll be able to ask questions that you have for him. Archie?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben, and thank you all for joining. I know lots of things are probably happening. I really appreciate you taking the time to hop into this call. As Ben mentioned, I am a Renaissance brother from American University, where I actually served as a balancement steward. So I worked very closely with my presidents of member development from that chapter. I also served as the balancement steward at the chapter at Northern Arizona University, and that's actually how I got connected to SIGEP in the first place. And I've really, really enjoyed my time with SIGEP. Unfortunately, I am so busy right now that I have not had the chance to connect with a local chapter. I'm living in Los Angeles right now, but that's something I'm actually planning to do moving forward, because I miss this engagement with students. So, as Ben mentioned, college student development is actually my work. That's what I do for a living, and I'll tell you a little bit about my story and how I got there. And culminating at the work that I do at the foundation. And so I started actually, as you were listening to my intro, I started out as a physical therapy student at Boston University. And so hence my degree being in health sciences. It was one of those things where I served as a student leader. So I was an orientation leader, I was a resident assistant, and I'm sure a lot of you are all of those things on your campuses as well. And then I discovered that that's something you can actually do for a living. And so when I realized that you could actually do higher ed as a profession, I decided to quit my physical therapy program. So try having that conversation with your parents who are shelling the big bucks for you to attend, if that's your situation, to do something that I thought was my passion, which is basically higher education. And so I literally switched my majors my senior year of college. And instead of getting my master's in physical therapy, decided to get my master's in higher education administration and policy planning administration instead. And I've been in higher ed ever since. It's one of those things that I've loved so much, working in and around college campuses, working with college students to make sure that they get in and are successful and are set up on a great career moving forward. So if there was a motto probably for the work that I've done and how I got to where I got to, it's probably, wow, I can't imagine I'm here. And let me explain a little bit and kind of where this story will lead. It's one of those things where if you keep yourself prepared, and I'll talk about what being prepared means, opportunities open up in the weirdest and sometimes most unexpected ways, right? And so I started out being in orientation. So I became an orientation director, coordinator, and then director for a couple of universities. And then had a really tough time at one of the institutions I worked in. So I worked at an interim position at the University of Rhode Island for about 9 months. And that position just did not work out. It was one of those things where like, I don't know if what I'm doing is what I should be doing for the rest of my life. But that actually caused me to think about, well, if I'm going to look for another opportunity for myself, maybe I should go get additional education. So that's what actually triggered me to go to grad school to get my doctorate at George Washington University in DC. Was not looking for a government position at all, but had the opportunity to intern for then Secretary of Education Margaret Spellings. And so it was a super interesting experience because I did not realize how much of a higher ed policy person I was. I kind of got bit by the higher ed policy world. And so I started at the US Department of Education as an intern and literally stayed there for about 9 years, climbing through the ranks, and actually survived, and actually transitioned during the period of the George W. Bush presidency to the Obama presidency. So I had a really good, healthy kind of 2 years with the Bush administration and then 6.5 years with the Obama administration. And then that opened up all sorts of other doors as well. In my work at the US Department of Education, working for the Secretary of Education, Undersecretary of Education, I got exposed to a lot of other colleges and universities, one of whom was the then president of Miami-Dade College. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, Miami-Dade College is one of the largest community colleges in the nation. It's in Miami, Florida. And I had met the president there during one of my opportunities at the Department of Education, including being what we call the advanced staffer for the then undersecretary to go speak at their commencement. So you know how officials typically get invited to speak at institutions' commencements. And so then Undersecretary of Education, Sarah Martinez Tucker, had been invited to be the commencement speaker at Miami-Dade. And I got to be kind of the advanced person or her security detail, really. So there. So I got connected to Miami-Dade College through that point, met the president, met the community. And so when it was time for me to look for an opportunity after the department, it was one of those things where if you survive in the federal government for 8 years, that's actually a long time. And so I said, you know what, it's time for me to move on a little bit. And at that point, my husband is from Miami. And so we were living in DC and he got tired of DC and said, hey, let's look at Miami. It's one of those things where I had applied for a job in Miami at Miami-Dade College, had not heard back, sent an email to the president of the college at that point, because I had basically connected with him through my work in the department, and then literally within a day got a job offer. So then I spent the next 5 years at Miami-Dade College as their vice provost for institutional effectiveness there, had a really great time basically figuring out how we can improve the use of data in making sure that our students are getting to the college and then graduating on time. Again, then after all of that fun stuff at Miami-Dade, I had the opportunity to then get on the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's radar. Miami-Dade College was a grantee of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and so I had the opportunity to essentially become kind of one of their usual suspects that they picked up the phone and asked about or asked for advice on for the work that they were doing. And so I met a lot of my colleagues even before I got to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Fast forward to, like I said, I was there for about 5 years. Fast forward 5 years, and then I get a LinkedIn message from my now boss, who is the director of the post-secondary success strategy at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, basically saying, hey, I have this position that's opening up. I think you'd be perfect for it. You should consider applying. And so that's what I did. So interesting, and so I've been at the foundation for about 2 years now. It's interesting when I think about that motto of, wow, I can't imagine that I would be here, because what I ended up really doing was preparing myself for these opportunities and just keeping myself open so that when these opportunities do come, I have an opportunity then to jump into these opportunities. So in my, actually between Miami-Dade College and the Gates Foundation, I actually did a stint with Partners for College Affordability and Public Trust, which is a startup advocacy organization. I had a really great time there as well. In none of those jobs did I have to go through the usual process of applying through the website and then waiting and waiting and waiting. Through the contacts I made in the networks that I had, I was able to pick up the phone, or if I got lucky, somebody picked up the phone and called me and said, hey, there's this opportunity, would you be interested? And that got me to where I am today. And so I'll delve in that in a second, but at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as Ben mentioned, our focus is to try to get more students of color and low-income students to and through college. And so I get to have the really cool job of trying to learn how awesome colleges and universities are doing this already, so that we can then essentially productize, because we're the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Bill Gates is very producty, right? We can productize the lessons learned about how colleges and universities are already doing this, so that other colleges and universities can do it. So if you think about your own college or university, if there's something that's really, really cool that they're doing there, that you probably think, wouldn't it be great if other colleges and universities already did this? Then that's an opportunity for us at the foundation to learn about what those cool things are. Similarly, if your college or university is doing something that you're like, I don't know if that's actually helping student success. If that's a lesson that you're learning from where you're standing, that's an opportunity for me to learn, what are those practices that they should not be doing? And so the lessons I've learned that I want to make sure that I impart with you related to this and how I got prepared to jump on opportunities for career and my own personal development is that it's important to know your stuff. So there is a reason to be a subject matter expert and why having a major in college is important. So as you know, I was a physical therapy major. I switched majors and have been majoring in essentially higher education administration for the past 20 years. I've constantly gone on conferences, have read up on the trade papers, tried to keep myself basically on top of the industry so that anytime anybody can call me, I would know what to say about the current state of affairs. That said, while it's important for you to know your stuff, it's also important for you to know the stuff that you don't know and to be able to acknowledge, yep, that is stuff that I don't know, and that's something that I'm willing to learn more about. So one of the super exciting things I'm learning at the Gates Foundation is that the US program, where actually the higher ed program at the Gates Foundation sits, is super, super tiny compared to the global health and development that the foundation does. So work on vaccines, work on eradicating polio, working on affordability issues and mobility issues for developing nations. That's something that I had known nothing about. And so I'm actually taking the opportunity now to learn more about what the other parts of the foundation that I'm working in are doing so that I can become versed in that work. And then the final piece related to being a subject matter expert, including, so you know what you know what you don't know, is learn how to shift, but build on your knowledge. So I mentioned earlier that I survived, or actually thrived under the transition from Bush to Obama. Here's a secret about federal policymaking. Despite the rhetoric, most policies and programs remain fairly stable. This is kind of what we had hoped during the past kind of election season of the infrastructure of government, right? The continuity of government, is that most programs around particularly education are usually the same. It's the veneer on top that gets the flavor from whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. And so what I did was I actually kept most of the materials I worked on the Bush administration, because most of them were super applicable to the Obama administration as well. And actually that was the same with my colleague who stayed there during the Trump administration and now during the Biden administration. There is something around the continuity of the materials that you're working on, but learning how to shift your work so that you become relevant and you continue to be relevant to the folks that you're working with. And so if I were to give you 3 pieces of advice in terms of evergreen skills and what I've learned from my work around being a subject matter expert, I would give you these 3 pieces. If you have an opportunity for yourself and for your members and for your brothers to keep these 3 things in mind, try to get as much information as you can about a policy infrastructure. So whatever you're working on, whatever you're majoring in, there's a policy frame around it, whether it's a federal policy, a state policy, or even a local policy. So for example, the work that you're currently doing right now at your institutions is governed by your institution's policies on student activities or on Greek life on your campus. So try to learn as much about what those policy infrastructures are so you know exactly where the levers are to push for change, okay? The second piece that I would encourage you to get to know a little bit more is what I'm calling the programs or practice part of it, right? So there's a policy angle, but there's also the program and practice part of it. You being VPs of membership development, you are actually in the perfect spot for this because you are empowered to know everything about the Bounce Man journey and the program, right? And so if you are not already taking advantage of the opportunities to learn as much as you can about the Bounce Man program, please do that. But that also extends beyond your work with SIGEP. Whatever your subject matter expertise is, knowing kind of what the programmatic or practical aspects of it is super, super critical. And then the final piece, so there's policy, the programs, the final piece is around data. Take advantage of any opportunity you may have to learn as much data about the thing that you're working on would be. Bonus points if you learn skills associated with that data. So what I like to joke around with people is, if you look at my LinkedIn profile, at some point during the department, I had the title of education statistician. Spoiler alert, I have absolutely no training in statistics other than the grad school courses in statistics. But what I did was I tried to learn as much as I can about Excel, about pivot tables, about doing VLOOKUPs, things that I can guarantee you, regardless of your job, will actually be super useful to you, regardless of the subject matter expertise that you hold. So policy, programs, and data are the three things I would leave you with. So let me stop there. I know I've been talking for a little bit, but would love to answer any questions and see if folks want to dive deep into any of the things I share.
Thanks so much, Archie. Everybody, feel free to put your questions in the chat, and I will facilitate the question and answer with Archie. So throw any questions that you have into the chat, and we'll get your questions answered here live. While they're doing that, Archie, you use this word in talking about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. You said productize. How to productize lessons learned. And that's what has made Bill Gates so successful in everything he's ever done, right? So education is sometimes seen as this, as something that isn't the same, that doesn't have the ability to be kind of a product, right? So can you talk a little bit more about that and how that shows up in your work, and maybe how you think that shows up within SIGEP?
Sure, no, absolutely. And thank you for that question. So the caveat I will make, right, is that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, because of our co-chairs, that's Bill and Melinda, that's their orientation, just because obviously they're both Microsoft folks. That's in their blood. If you go to any other foundation, that foundation's kind of ethos and orientation will be exactly based on who the founder is and what their orientation is, right? So it's not that's kind of untrue across different types of philanthropic organizations. What I will say, though, that I think I've learned a little bit in my 20 years in higher ed is sometimes we look at the word product in a negative light, right? Because we think of it as being, commoditizing, for example, education, something that's supposed to, inflame the mind and inspire you. How could you productize that? I personally think you can actually hold both truths in your hand, and here's why. Particularly higher ed, and if you're an education person, John Dewey's book, Democracy and Education, is the seminal text about what education is all about. And that's about informing and educating citizens so they can become active parts of society. And that's really what this is all about. That said, education exists within an infrastructure, right? And what infrastructure sometimes responds to is these widgets, these products, right? And so part of the reality that we must live in is you can't accomplish one without the other. So there has to be that inspiration part of education. And then there's the actual practical parts of inspiration of how do you actually work this on a campus? Because there's something where, you could be learning so many awesome lessons here right now, but if you can't take that with you to your next chapter meeting, then that would have been useless, right? So there is something around how do you package it so that it's most useful to the people that need it. So in terms of the work within CGAP, you could think about the Balanced Man curriculum theoretically as a product, right? There is something that's super, super inspirational about it. And one of the reasons I got involved with SIGEP and I was super inspired to be part of SIGEP was that we all think about curriculum in a very intentional way, in a holistic way, right? Where other groups may not be thinking about that way. But that inspiration can only get us so far unless we figure out a way to productize that. And sometimes that productizing might look very inelegant. It might not be sexy. It might look like bylaws. It might look like very structured worksheets that we have to complete. But those are just the artifacts of the way that we do things. So obviously there are ways to improve our products. Product improvement is kind of a thing. So that's what I would encourage us to do, is to not think either or, but both.
Yeah, that's, I think, really helpful and relates to the kind of things that these guys are doing. Guys, don't be shy. If you have questions for Archie, throw them in the chat. I think this was a question that they asked last month, and I've seen it from a lot of undergraduates as they navigate what at times feels like the biggest bureaucracy in the world, which is their universities, right? You talked about understanding the policy infrastructure so you know how to push for change. What's your biggest piece of advice for an undergraduate to work with the administration that are making the rules that might be impacting the work that they're trying to do?
That's a really good question. So here's a dirty little secret for higher ed administrators, right? We're people too. And these people are motivated by certain things, and some of it is motivated by fear of getting sued, for example. Some of it is desire to see student development. Some of it is desire to just get a paycheck and then leave at 5 p.m. Part of, I think, one of the tactics that could be useful is if you understand, for example, your student handbook. And I encourage you, if you don't have a copy of your student handbook, that's something you should actually have a copy of, so that you know exactly what the constraints are. So get a copy of your student handbook, and then identify the champions in your campus, because it may not always be the Greek life advisor. It may not always be the director of Greek life or the director of student activities, right? It might be somebody else. Here's the thing: our colleges and universities offer Greek life and other opportunities on campus because inherently they know what the value is on student development, right? So already they're bought in. So the question is, how do we leverage that them being bought in to make sure that we push for the kinds of changes that we would want, that at the end of the day will benefit students? There is a little bit of case making that needs to be made. And so I think one of the skills that is super, super helpful is around getting folks about how to share your points in a way that is persuasive, right? Without alienating your audience. It's basically how to kind of to win your audience over. That is super critical, so that when you identify those champions, then you can identify, okay, if I know that my dean of students responds to this, then I should go through my tactics that way. If I know that the hall director responds to this, I should go this way. That kind of messaging and kind of packaging, again, productizing of that messaging will be very, very critical.
Yeah, to get a little bit more specific there, Craig asks, what if our university has a bad view of what Greek life is even doing?
No, that's a really great question. I've seen that on campuses as well. So there are a couple of things that I'm hoping you're doing. Number one, that you're coordinating with other organizations, other Greek organizations on your campus, because this is one of those things where you cannot do this alone, right? The second thing I would do is, at the end of the day, particularly for institutions that are driven by fear of lawsuits, for example. They want to do the return on investment calculation. Is it worth having these organizations on campus? So you almost have to make a case for it to be worth it on your campus. And this is where I know SIGEP has a leg up, because I know our GPAs are super high compared to our peers. And I know that we are super involved in other things on campus, right? So you want to be able to demonstrate that our brothers are not only in SIGEP, but they are also in student government. They are also resident assistants. They are also in other leadership positions at the campus. So then you can demonstrate how the learning that you are actually accomplishing here in SIGEP is helping advance actually the work of the institution, of the university. So I would not be shy about those GPAs, would not be shy about all the other things you're involved in on campus. And so this is the opportunity for you to kind of shine a little bit of light of what you're doing.
And probably the better you are with data, the easier that'll be to tell that story, right?
Oh, here you go. Yeah. My gosh. Yeah. If graduation rates, man, if you're able to share your graduation rates on your chapter, that's fantastic.
Yeah. Drew asks, what's the best way to build a relationship in order to enact policy changes or create events?
That's a great question. Like I said, higher administrators live within a context as well. And that context could be driven by things like your institution's strategic plan, budget realities at your institution, et cetera, et cetera. So in addition to knowing your student handbook, if you have not yet looked up your institution's strategic plan, its mission, its vision, its core values, that's something you should know about, because that tells you how to hook the SIGEP stuff into the work that the institution is already doing. Again, what you want to sell them is that we're here to help you do your job, higher ed administrators, right? We're taking it upon ourselves to organize ourselves in this way, and we want to make you look good to your trustees, to your state legislators that may be approving the budget and things like that. So if they see you as an ally, as opposed to the problem, then you can then help leverage that relationship to move some of the policy changes that you want.
Yeah, and as Vice President of Member Development, you're in a perfect position to invite those people in to your chapter meetings, challenge meetings, to have conversations with members of the chapter and to help develop your members. I know that university staff love to feel wanted and to feel valuable. And when we invite them into our spaces, it does that too.
So that's how I got involved. I got invited to a SIGEP meeting. And to me, that was, again, that started my relationship with SIGEP since essentially 2002.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
We'll wrap up with one more question. So Sean is asking, what were some of the things you did not know shortly after college that were beneficial for you, that you think maybe these guys could help their members know prior to graduation?
Absolutely. So, and I don't know your family circumstances. I don't know your circumstances, but to me, that whole notion of switching majors was I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know that there was life beyond what I was focusing on at that time. Again, if you keep yourself prepared and informed and make the kinds of relationships in various networks, you're going to find yourself in very weird and awesome opportunities. And so just keep yourselves open to that opportunity. It may not, so I'm not telling you to change your major right now, but if you want to think about maybe post-college, let's say, going to grad school, going to your first job, things will open up as long as you prepare yourself so that you're ready to jump when the opportunity pops up.
That's great. Archie, any final thoughts before the undergraduates move into their breakout rooms?
No, I really appreciate this opportunity. So here's a pitch. Please find me on LinkedIn. So if you don't have a LinkedIn profile, make one. Find me on LinkedIn and please connect with me and introduce yourself, because I would really love to get connected, and I'm happy to serve as a resource anytime.